CC&Rs gets very, very confusing. We know that the governing documents we know what they are and what they do. Let's talk about evaluating those CC&Rs. What do folks need to be concerned about when reviewing their current set of documents? Obviously, the easy answer is, have your attorney review them, but, that can get expensive. Is there a more general guideline? I mean, basically speaking, if our governing documents are only a few years old, should we be just fine?
Well, as I'm sure you and your listeners are aware, there's a portion of the Civil Code known as the Davis-Sterling Common Interest Development Act that governs community associations, or CIDs, homeowners associations. And it seems like yearly legislation is enacted or proposed to change this portion of the Civil Code. So within the last 3 to 4 years alone, we've seen a lot of changes in the Davis-Sterling Common Interest Development Act. And so those changes, if they're not reflected in the governing documents, they could make your governing documents unreliable. In the past couple of years, we've seen legislation that actually requires affirmative action by the association to amend the governing documents. AB 3182, which addresses leasing restrictions, it basically states that association governing documents can no longer effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict renting or leasing, and requires that associations actually amend their governing documents by December 31st, 2021, in order to comply with that new law. So we're actually now seeing law that's requiring associations to amend the governing documents. And of course,
Brittany, just to jump in here real quick, if the law trumps the CC&Rs, why does the law now require that those CC&Rs be restated? I mean, wouldn't just having the law be there be enough?
The wisdom of the legislature. For the most part, yes, you're correct in that the law prevails over the governing documents to the extent of any inconsistencies. But here we have a law on the books that actually states associations must amend the governing documents by the end of this year, if you're listening to this podcast in 2021.
Well, that was sure nice of the legislature.
Wasn't it? And there's a question of, does this requirement that the association amend governing documents mean that they have to go through the hoops of having members vote by secret ballot to amend the CC&R? So for example, if you have a minimum lease term in your CC&Rs of 1 year, that's no longer valid and enforceable. And now associations are required to amend the governing documents to eliminate that requirement. Associations can impose a 30-day minimum lease term. So does that mean communities have to amend the CC&Rs, or can they adopt a rule change that would impose a 30-day minimum lease term? But then if they do that, there's a conflict between the rules, which would have a 30-day minimum lease term, and the CC&Rs, which would have a 1-year minimum lease term. So there's a conflict there. Our firm's approach, and I think best practice, is to at least attempt to amend the CC&Rs. Of course, there might be voter apathy. It might be impossible to get that vote. And, we can talk about later how to be proactive and make sure that you're able to get that approval of the members. But yeah, so the legislature has not clearly instructed associations on how they're supposed to get this amendment done.